Hi, South Coast Christian Life Groups. Welcome to week 7 of groups. We are on the home stretch of our winter trimester. We'll be wrapping up next week. Wow, this has gone fast. I hope that these groups have been encouraging, life-giving, and challenging as you continue to grow in your faith. Thanks for putting in the time these last 7 weeks and making this group a priority. Before we get started, quick reminder. We encourage openness and sharing, but as always, please be conscious of the feelings of others, whether they're inside the group or outside of the group, as you're sharing. And lastly, we also ask that everything that's shared in the group stays in the group. This, again, helps us build community. As always, if you want to catch up on this current series, Jesus Said, or the past series, you can check out YouTube. For the vodcast, you can check out southcoastchristian.com, and you can also listen on the podcast on your smartphone. So let's jump into this week's discussion. This past Sunday in week 7 of Jesus Said, our current sermon series, we studied the parable of the talents. And as usual, I'll paraphrase the parable, but now would be a great time to pause the video and read the parable together as a group if you'd like to do so. It can be found in Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 25. So Jesus told this parable toward the end of his ministry here on earth. He was preparing his followers to better understand the kingdom of heaven and the expectations that God has for them. As we've learned these past 7 weeks, Jesus used parables, which were simple stories, to convey a deeper meaning or truth. About 1/3 of the parables dealt with money, and that was not by accident. Even today, whether we're teaching our kids simple math, all the way up to the balancing of the complex financial situations that we find ourselves in as adults, money is a strong motivator, which makes it a powerful teaching tool. In the parable, a master gives 3 of his servants some money to manage while he's gone on a long trip. The 3 servants approach using the money in 3 different ways, all the way from investing and gaining returns, down to the very last servant just burying his money in the ground so that it won't be lost. As Pastor Tom taught this weekend, this parable is about really 2 main things: faith versus fear, and being a good steward of what God has given you. Jesus tells this parable because he knows he will be going away for a time, and when he returns, he will be given an account of what we have done with what he has given us. So let's start with faith over fear. As we learned, being faith-filled and investing what God has given us, financially and otherwise, will get us more to invest. Check out this clip from Sunday.
God gives, and then we're responsible to manage. Notice in verse 15, God divided his possessions according to each person's abilities. He gave the one servant 5 bags, another servant 2 bags, and he gave another servant 1 bag of silver. It's interesting how Jesus chose to share this parable. The 2 servants that he gave the most money to were successful in managing what the master gave them. They were the one that had the 5 bags, the one that had the 2 bags, they were the most successful. The one that was given the 1 bag of silver, guess what? He was a total failure because he responded in fear. I always think about this because these parables are fictitious stories that Jesus made up to share spiritual truth.
So as PT mentioned, inside this parable there's a line that says, "given according to their abilities." This leads us to believe that the servant who received the larger sum had already proven some faithfulness in the past. So our first question for today is a 2-part question. If I've never proven my abilities, does that mean that God won't invest in me in the future? The second part of the question is my hesitancy to invest my talents a fear response? Go ahead, pause the video there, and I'll be back with you in a few minutes. I hope you had some great discussion there. So now let's play the blame game. That's always fun. In the parable, the 3rd servant just buries his silver in the ground. And that's the safe play. He won't earn any interest, but he also won't lose the whole thing. Kind of in the modern way of looking at things, the first servant might have taken his silver and invested it in cryptocurrency, Apple or Amazon or Tesla stock, or a high-yielding account. But the 3rd servant just stashed his cash underneath a mattress. His reasoning was 100% fear-based. In verse 24, he says, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man." This is a common response from people unwilling to commit to the responsibility that God has entrusted with them. Somehow we end up wanting to blame God for our failures. So our next question is, why does fear restrict generosity, and why does faith promote generosity? I'm talking financially and otherwise, as the parable of the talents can mean us investing our actual talents and gifts and not just our money or our finances. Go ahead, pause the video right there. I'll be right back. So moving on to the last point of the sermon on Sunday, it was that faith releases God's favor. Check out this clip from the message.
There's an old saying, the rich keep getting richer and the poor just keep getting poorer. You've heard that saying before? Most of the time that saying is said in a negative connotation. It's kind of said in a negative way, but I would challenge you that it really is a matter of stewardship, and it's really a biblical principle that you can find in the Bible. It's a principle that we find in this story of these three servants. The servant with just one bag of silver, guess what? He managed his money so poorly because of fear that the master took away that one bag of silver, and who did the master give it to? The one who had the most. That's not fair. We live in a society that, man, that's not right. That's not fair. We don't like that kind of stuff when we hear this kind of stuff. Why would Jesus do that? Why would the master give it to the one that already had so much? Oh, could it be that the one that had so much, guess what, was living a life of faith? He was faithful with the things that he had already been given, and God saw good stewardship, so God said, oh, you know what? I'm going to bless this poor person with even more.
So sometimes it helps if we reverse roles with God and we try and see things from his perspective. If you had $1 million and you were leaving on a trip, who would you entrust your money with? The lazy person, the person with no motivation or no financial experience, somebody who hasn't proven themselves, or somebody who has proven abilities, a financial advisor or a well-trusted friend who can manage well. In response to faithfulness, the New Living Translation, or NLT Bible, says, I will give you many more responsibilities. So many people are looking for the reward without the responsibility. So our last question for today is, what is a responsibility that you want God to entrust you with? Go ahead, pause the video right there. I'll be right back with you. So I hope you had some great discussion today. If you have a little extra time or you wanted to continue the discussion, there are a couple of more questions on the screen. Thank you for faithfully being part of this life group. This group itself is an example of investing your talents, of taking faithfully what God has given you and making an effort to grow and to manage it well. I encourage you this week to take a step in faith. Invest some of the talents that you've been given by God and see what types of rewards or what types of responsibilities that you'll gain in the future. Have a great week. We'll see you next week for the final week of our life groups for the winter trimester. God bless.